Hello, Roger.
Hello, Ludwig. Nice to meet you.
Uh, it's nice for me too. Thank you for being here today. You give talks and hold satsangs and retreats where you share insights on the non-dual understanding and the attainment of peace of mind and happiness in everyday life. For my first question, can you tell us about your background, including your teachers and influences that have shaped your journey?
Um, yes, sure. I think I've had a fairly ordinary life. When I say that, average, but also having said that, given that most of us listening to this type of uh, recording are relatively well off in life compared to a lot of people in the world who are living in poverty or in much more extreme situations. But as far as those people above the poverty line, um, fairly average. So I grew up in Malta, a small island in the Mediterranean. Parents who loved me and looked after me and my sister very well. So I guess we could say that is very fortunate, not always the case. Um, I didn't grow up in a family that was particularly religious or spiritual. However, having said that, I did go to church for the first 15 years of my life, and my mother did have an Indian guru that she followed, but that was a sort of mystery to me, or at least I didn't know what she was, what this little photo of a man with a candle in front of it was. So I wasn't indoctrinated in that sense. I liked keeping to myself when I was young, but at the same time had friends. But I enjoyed my own company, and I found that I was quite inquisitive. And I guess the seeking stemmed out of that capacity to think and to be inquisitive. Um, and I guess looking back on it, I had a fortunate disposition whereby my makeup, my structure, wasn't one that was full of suffering.
Mm.
So I don't remember spending my childhood or my adolescence or young adult life sort of plagued with different forms of suffering. That too is fortunate. But I didn't have a clarity on what was going on
Mm.
to the extent that inevitably gets deeper and deeper as one investigates the situation more and more. So I guess around the time of late 20s, I found myself coming across information in the form of books that was information that seemed really relevant to me, information about life and how to navigate life, or explanations of psychology, and that very quickly turned into information that was beyond psychology into what we would call spirituality. Came across different teachings: Wei Wu Wei, Nisargadatta, Ramana Maharshi, Lao Tzu, teachings of the Buddha. I had the teachings from Christianity, the teachings of Jesus that I interpreted very differently, I think, to how a lot of Christians that are indoctrinated or relate to religion in a very literal way. So I often found it strange seeing religious extremists interpreting certain phrases of the Bible in very literal ways. I always saw it as metaphor. And when I came across non-dual teachings, for some reason, whatever that is, there was a deep resonance with the message. And I fell into the trap of taking it literally. But that too serves a purpose. It means that there's just something else to move beyond, that literal interpretation, and that to me is part of the process that happens as the understanding goes deeper and deeper. We start seeing, thanks to our experience and other bits and pieces that come in, what is really meant by some of the statements. And I guess when I say what is really meant, that's when the understanding goes beyond the literal interpretation of the statement, to a place where we can really feel for ourselves where that statement was coming from. And often when we understand it like that, and we feel for ourselves, and we realize where that statement emanated from, it ends up meaning something quite different to what we originally interpreted it as. So I would say that in the early 2000s, the teachings of A Course in Miracles, Nisargadatta Maharaj, and Ramana, and Lao Tzu, and Wei Wu Wei, those were the teachings that really created this mystical appreciation for something beyond the physical, something that I would refer to as the core of the human being, the essence of the human being, something that everyone has, but we tend to overlook it because it's so ever present that and doesn't force itself onto us, and it doesn't it's the basis on which we recognize everything that's happening in life, but it doesn't insist on it being known. It's just there, and so we all have it, but there isn't a conscious appreciation of it, and that tends to mean that the movement becomes a movement of thinking, and we could say a disconnection from that core essence. So the top-down teachings that focus so much on what we really are as opposed to that which we have mistaken ourselves for, were very useful at bringing a realization, a recognition of that essence. And I think that's a very important part of the process. Without our attention being turned in on itself, where the very movement of consciousness, the movement of awareness, and the innate sense of being becomes recognized and known, without that, there isn't really a grounded, peaceful, safe place to rest. And it just turns out that this essence in itself happens to be peace. And I think that's why peace and happiness, contentment is available for the human being. It's not something that we manufacture. It's not something we have to construct. I think if we had to construct peace or find a way of being peaceful, it wouldn't necessarily be available in the way it actually is. But the good news is that our essence seems to be something very specific. And if we find ourselves folding inward and finding a capacity to rest in that essence, then what manifests automatically is a very different sense of who we are and a different experience of life. When I say different, this very important fact is that there is able to be a relaxation. There is able to be a movement of trust, a movement of allowing life to flow, as opposed to the mind constructed motive that is to dictate, to control, to make life happen. And that is that's a very scary position to be in, ultimately, because as the one in charge, we're continually faced with the reality that there are so many things out of our control, and at some point, or regularly, we will feel this existential fear, this fear of death, of not being able to control things. And I think that's the human suffering stems from the fact that the movement has tended to be outward in a way where we are constructing and controlling, trying to control, thinking we are the controllers. So the early 2000s was about consolidating that resting in being, which is experiential and tends to happen as we move past a lot of the identification with things that we are not, like emotions, thoughts, outcomes, actions, behaviors. And then in 2005, I came across Ramesh and heard that he was giving talks in Mumbai, and he was a translator for Nisargadatta. And it was only because Nisargadatta's teachings had been so instrumental that I felt the urge to go and say hello to Ramesh, maybe just as a form of reverence to Nisargadatta. I hadn't come across Ramesh's teachings or considered him a teacher. I was really going there as a sort of bridge to Nisargadatta. And when I turned up, I only scheduled 36 hours in Mumbai on my way to Europe. And that was enough time to go to one satsang. And as destiny had it, there were these big floods on the day that I was there, and the airport was closed for 10 days. So I had to stay 10 days. And that in itself was very fortunate. Mm-hmm. And it became apparent after that time with Ramesh, really after the first day, that something more was happening here, and it wasn't just about me paying respects to Nisargadatta. Now, Ramesh's teaching was something I needed, and that was bringing in a more pragmatic vision of non-duality, because the awakening teachings say certain things that are very easily misinterpreted by the mind, to the point where we become non-pragmatic. And that lack of pragmatism is essentially a form of misunderstanding. And so Ramesh's teaching was very much what I would refer to as an integrating teaching, which means bringing the realization that had happened back into the body, back into the person that has to continue living their life until physical death of the body happens. And until that happens, I think you end up with a whole lot of concepts like I am not the body, as an example of a concept, which is, it's not that it is not true, but it's not absolutely true. And the non-dual top-down teachings need to say that, right? Because we are overly identified with the body to the exclusion of the more subtle aspect of who we are. And so as part of the process of the teaching, it needs to convince us that we are not the body. That allows an awakening to the formless. But then at some point, we might see that concept has maybe been taken a little too literally, and life through another teaching will hopefully, probably, in my case it did, do the work of undoing that belief, such that we end up living just as it is. It's let's put it that way, because maybe putting words onto it, concepts onto it, although helpful for teachings, at the end it's the integration comes down to finding yourself living without thinking about it too much.
Could you explain what is your specific approach today to non-duality or non-doership?
Well, you see, for me, it's it's been a very important journey to understand the difference between teaching and living. So that might sound counterintuitive, right? Because someone would say, well, when you're teaching, you're just living. It's no different to if you were watching television or going for a walk or doing your work. It's part of life. And that is true. but the very activity of speaking about life, that's what teaching is. Teaching is delivering concepts often, right? It's putting these things into words. And I think the seeker, before they, or as part of the understanding, it becomes very clear that the words are pointers. They are not the truth itself. And this is important to say because the way we tend to develop as human beings is that we don't have that much clarity often on the fact that a concept is not necessarily the truth. And that's because we spend so much time thinking our own concepts about ourselves and about how life is and how it should be and what the other should have done, etc., that we lose a perspective about the nature of thought. And we might then listen to spiritual teachings and take the concepts in the same way as if they are some sort of universal truth. And really the teachings are there to move us beyond our position and ultimately move us beyond the teaching, beyond the concept. And that's really what understanding, deeply for yourself, experientially, non-conceptually, is pointing at. So there was this work that I needed to go through that says, okay, be very clear. I had to be very clear for myself the difference between what exactly what role I was playing when putting forward teachings. So non-duality, when I'm in life itself now, doesn't play a role. It's irrelevant. And what I mean by that, I'll put forward the notion of non-duality in the teaching framework. It says one of the misunderstandings that has been set in place by life as part of our human development is the deeply ingrained assumption, belief, that I am an individual autonomous entity in control of everything that I say, everything that I feel, the reactions that happen, and the outcomes. I'm in control of the outcomes. And so we see ourselves as the controller, the author, the script writer, the one in charge, the one that dictates how things unfold. And that is referred to as the belief in personal doership. And in many teachings and religions, religions have, I think, the problem is the institution comes into religions, and then there are certain directions it gets taken. But when we look at the core of the religions, there's a lot of wisdom there. And thy will be done, meaning God's will be done, is a key tenet. And we might, hear it and we might say it, but do we really, really believe it? The notion of God's will, it runs counter to the belief of my will, as I am the doer. And so surrender to God's will really means, it sounds like a prescription, that someone is saying, you need to surrender to God's will. What I think or what I know for myself it means is that life will change your perspective such that a surrendering of one's personal doership happens, meaning that if we're lucky, life brings about certain perspectives as a result of a whole lot of things, thoughts, teachings that came before, peak experiences, such that we simply can't see life the way that we used to. Now, the way we used to see life supported the belief of personal doership. And as that view of life gets impacted, we could come to the position where we say, I simply cannot be the doer. I understand now that life is a happening, not my doing, meaning each moment is happening, including, the things inside me, the thoughts inside me, the movements, the outcomes. And so that is the shift from having the belief of personal doership, not to a belief of non-doership. You know, that's where we might start. We might believe that I'm the doer, and then shift to a belief I am not the doer. But really, it's more accurately presented like, I no longer believe I'm the doer. I don't really have a counter belief. I just move through life seeing that everything is happening. And so that's what I mean, that in life, when I'm just have no role of putting it into words, the belief in personal doership or the belief in non-doership are not relevant. What is relevant is that the belief in personal doership has dissolved. And that dissolution of the belief in personal doership, we find, or the belief in personal doership is responsible for a whole sequence of mental activity that has a very specific quality to it. Within that mental activity, there is this I, this conceptual image of what we are, and the belief in doership says I did well, I didn't do well, the other didn't do well, or the other did well, and this should have happened, this shouldn't have happened. And so there is a whole series of commentary about life that has at its core what I believe I am, and often the thought is about how life is attacking what I am. So the dissolution of the belief of doership, which accompanies the dissolution of the internal sense of, the dissolution of the belief of doership comes with a seeing that what I had experienced myself as is very much less concrete than it might have originally seemed. So if we deconstruct the human experience into its parts, we see that there really isn't anything there of substance that remains unchanging. It's thoughts that are always changing, emotions that are changing, feelings, moods. The body is always changing, getting stronger or getting weaker, healthy or sick. And all of our different emotions. One day we're happy, one day we're sad, or 1 minute we're happy, 1 minute we're sad. So when we deconstruct all the parts of the human being, we find they're completely changing and that they're all layered on top of each other to create a sense of this is who I am. And as that dissolves, because we see deeper, let's say, then the belief in doership dissolves, and that means the self, the false self, has dissolved. And so all this suffering that is built on the platform of the false self dissolves with it. And my experience is this is where, this is why happiness in daily living, which is what I speak about, is available to us.
And what in a practical way, what are the tools you use in your teaching? If we can talk about teaching, do you teach meditations or movement or visualizations or just satsangs?
Yes, in some of the retreats, I will have some explorations into the inner space, which I guess you could say is closer to a meditation practice. And I encourage meditation as part of the inquiry and investigation. I think the meditation space reveals a lot that the daily living environment doesn't reveal, especially at the beginning when we're becoming more familiar with seeing these more subtle aspects of the self. But primarily, the teaching is a teaching of concepts. It's a framework that can be delivered quite consistently. And the framework hopefully speaks in simple, understandable, everyday language and points out certain things, certain characteristics about life, about the human being, and about what suffering and happiness, the happiness through peace of mind are. So it puts descriptions onto all of these things, and they're descriptions that are not readily available in life. They're not things that are described this way. And my experience is that that information, if it lands in a certain way, which really means if it's destiny for a particular seeker to have the information delivered, and for it to land a certain way, then that information starts shedding a lot of light on the dynamics that are important for this search. So an example of that, there are some very key fundamental mistakes or things we don't realize as seekers, or even as before we're seekers. And so the first thing is, what are we really looking for? Is the question. What are we really looking for? Now, if we look at how humans move in life and the thinking processes, we have become convinced that what we're looking for is a better life through outcomes. And outcomes really means through pleasure, through gaining, making the circumstance perfect. And so we see that there is a continuous movement to either get a better job, get better friends, be a better person, more fame, be more attractive, more recognized, more appreciated. It's all about essentially, how can I get more of a certain type of thing? So we could say that's a deeply, deeply ingrained belief that where I will find purpose or happiness, where life will one day be acceptable, is when I have carefully crafted my life so that it is perfect. And what I mean by perfect means the circumstance is perfect. Once I get that job, then everything will be okay. And this is quite standard for any human being. They might have different priorities about what they think will give them happiness, different achievements, different pleasures. But in principle, it's the same. Everyone sets off in life thinking that happiness is to be found in outcomes. And that's not accidental. I think it's just simply how our thinking develops based on how our experience of life as a human being is. We really feel pain and feel pleasure. And then we have this inner realm where there is a dissatisfaction. And I think the conclusion is, I'm dissatisfied because I had these pains, because this person is ignoring me, because I didn't do this job well enough, and so I didn't get paid. We just assume that the internal dissatisfaction is because of the external environment. And so this assumption, my happiness is to be found in outcomes, gets put in place. So the teaching, as I've just done, describes that, hopefully in ways that a seeker, and I'm not trying to put across beliefs or convince anyone. I'm just saying, look, this is my observation about a dynamic that is happening in life. Check it out for yourself. It's been delivered in a way that hopefully is clear. Now, you, if it's your destiny, will think about it and start observing it for yourself, primarily with your own thinking patterns. Then the teaching says, let me tell you where happiness in life really can be found. The happiness in life, there is the potential for unbroken happiness in life, but it is not a happiness through outcomes. It is not a happiness through pleasure, 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 pleasure. It is a happiness that we can say is happiness through peace of mind. And peace of mind is not gaining anything. It is the falling away of the opposite of peace of mind, which is suffering. And when we look at what our suffering is, we find that our suffering is our attitude to what happens in life, our attitude to how we function in life, how the other functions in life, and what the consequence of our functioning and the other's functioning is. Now, because it is an attitude to life, it's very hidden, because the attitude to life says, oh, what I did is not good enough, right? Or what I did is very good. And so it seems like it is about what I did or didn't do, what I did well enough or I didn't do well enough. And so then again, our attitude to life, which is the problem, doesn't seem to be the problem, because we can't see that we have an attitude to life, because it is talking about things we do. So once again, the focus goes out into the circumstance. So having this concept put forward that says, you know, there is a layer of our thinking that is the problem. And that layer is what we could call the psychological me. And essentially the psychological me is a movement that we can call attitude towards life, attitude towards one's own actions and the actions of the other. And so what is the attitude that constitutes suffering? We can say it's the attitude of personal doership and attachment to outcomes. So what that means is the two things we've spoken about. The deeply ingrained belief that says, I am the doer, because that's how it appears. It appears that I am speaking because something inside that is me is deciding these are the words that need to come out. And the same with our actions and our feelings. So that is the belief in personal doership. And the second is the belief that my happiness is to be found in external outcomes, in circumstance. And those two beliefs become the basis of an attitude that is always commentating on life along the lines of personal doership and attachment to outcome, which is the belief that I need life to look a certain way in order for me to be complete. And so we start off on the basis I am not complete because I'm not happy. And that attitude can exist for our whole life without us even knowing that it exists. So the teaching says it's very important for attention, awareness, to land on this dimension and start to understand it for what it is and for what it delivers. So the teaching starts off as an intellectual understanding. I'm putting forward intellectual concepts. I think they're very important concepts because they point to the dynamics of human living, and specifically with an aim on human happiness. And so someone hears it and they start off hopefully having an intellectual understanding, meaning they come away going, oh, I listened to what he said and it makes sense. It makes sense, but it hasn't become more than an intellectual understanding. So at that point, it's not particularly useful. But given it has been understood intellectually, there is the potential for it then to become much more than just an intellectual understanding. And that is what happens as part of the process of our observation of what the intellectual concepts are pointing at, meaning these dynamics I've been speaking about. And as we start to see these dynamics for ourselves, then we no longer say, oh, I just believe what Roger says, that we're not the doer, that my happiness is, or my unhappiness is because I'm attached to outcomes. we say, let's say, thanks to Ramesh, he pointed out for things that I have observed for myself, and I've now come to see without a doubt, this is what's in play. And inevitably, when we start to see something as a problem, if we realize we're hammering our finger with a hammer every day, but we never realized we were doing it, and then we start understanding that the pain I'm feeling is because I'm hammering my finger without realizing it, that deep understanding can start to interfere with the habit of hammering the finger. And that is the process of the intellectual understanding going deeper and deeper and uprooting the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership and attachment to outcome.
You talked about unbroken peace of mind. So it seems like there is a point where there is total liberation from suffering. Did I understand well your?
Yes, that is the concept in the teaching. That, and it, sometimes because it's not people's experience, right? They've been seekers for many years, and maybe they see some progress, but they still see suffering happening. You will sometimes hear, unbroken peace of mind or total peace of mind is unachievable. It's not available. It's unfair for people to say it is, or they don't know what they're saying. I can understand where that comes from. And the reality of the situation is not everyone is going to have what we can call total understanding or unbroken peace of mind. But it is very available, and we simply need to look at it rationally and logically to understand why it is available. If someone experiences a lessening of their suffering because of some seeking, and let's say they some realization about involvement in past events happens for them, they might find that the suffering in the form of thinking about the past gets less. But then some other form of suffering hasn't got less. But let's look at the one that did get less. It lessens because some change has happened internally. Some part of the psychological self or the belief system or the attitude has changed. Now, if it can change a little bit, and then the person experiences change a little bit more after another few months of seeking. And so let's say it's changed 10% over a 6-month period. And then over a 3-year period, it's changed 40%. Like dissolved. What I mean by changed is the misunderstanding that creates the suffering, some of it has dissolved. Well, there's no reason why that process can't just keep going until all of the misunderstanding or all of the false beliefs have been seen through. So on the basis that misunderstanding or suffering is based on false beliefs, and we see how our beliefs can change, how we can come to see an error in our thinking, and that when that changes, we no longer function according to the erroneous thought. If it's as practical as that, then I think it's fair for us to say, I may never get to a point where all my misunderstanding has been seen through. But if some misunderstanding can be seen through, I can see how for some people, all misunderstanding can fall away eventually.
Do you have any advice for individuals facing doubts or emotional emotional difficulties on their spiritual path? How can they regain a sense of purpose on their journey?
I appreciate the question, and I think it's important for a seeker to feel that a teacher can relate to them. And so I understand how frustrating the seeking process can be. We go through periods where there are moments of clarity or periods of clarity, and then suddenly it can change again, and any clarity or understanding seems to be thrown out the window or disappear, and we find ourselves back in a place of feeling uncomfortable. And that's very much part of the process, because there's lots of layers of misunderstanding, and the way I see it, as one layer is cleared up, we may have a period of clarity and a sense of freedom from that layer of belief that has dissolved. But the process is then inevitably going to throw us into a deeper or bring up more misunderstanding. So I would say that this is normal. It's the process at work. And even when it feels like this is all pointless and like there is no end, it's not necessarily how it feels. So I think Ramesh used to use an example of 100 steps, and you might be on the 98th step, but you don't know you're on the 98th step or on the 99th step. And it can feel like there is an endless number of steps ahead of you. Let's say it's dark and you can't see how many steps there are. But the truth is you might be on the 98th or 99th step. The process is, it's taking you along. Non-dualship is really saying that life is living us. We are being lived. Not the enlightened people are being lived and everyone else is having to struggle for themselves. Everyone is always being lived. And it is your destiny to experience the circumstance you experience moment after moment after moment, and your destiny to experience the inner state that you experience, which can include frustration, suffering, peace. And some of these internal states of discomfort, of suffering, are not, they're the most uncomfortable thing, because it's an uncomfortable with oneness with oneself, really. So it can be very uncomfortable. The real understanding in this particular framework starts kicking in when we realize there isn't anyone to do the seeking. So the question, what can someone do to gain liberation, for example, is the wrong question, right? It's reinforcing, oh, so I'm dedicated, tell me what I need to do next. I say there is no doer. There is the liberation. Now that can seem very frustrating to someone who still believes, but if there's no doer, then it's how am I going to make it happen? Mm-hmm. And the point is that, if this belief in doership subsides, we'll realize there's nothing that is needed. Because if it subsides, there will be peace of mind with life in this moment. And that's when it becomes clear, oh, there was never really anything to achieve, meaning I didn't need to fix life, because if in this moment the attitude of doership and attachment to outcomes falls away, we'll realize that all of the seeking, all of the suffering that makes us feel like I need to do something, I need to get somewhere, was actually what we could say self-created. It's not really self-created, because even that is one's destiny and happening according to the story of life. So this is the paradox, is that if we're suffering, one of the answers that I'd have to give is there's nothing you can do. It's destiny. Having said that, it could be destiny for the suffering to stop in the next 5 minutes. It will stop when it's destined to stop. If that information is heard by a part of the system that doesn't say this is really bad news, because it isn't really bad news, if it's heard by a part of our system that understands, then there can be a relaxation with the suffering. And we'll realize in that moment, half of the problem was the fact that there was a resistance of suffering. There was a movement that says, how am I going to get rid of this? And if we understand, it's inevitable, it's destiny, I'm not doing it, this is just life. Ramesh used to say, we're in prison in life. Life is like a prison. He said that because you're not in control of what happens next. Just like in prison, they tell you when you're going to sleep, they tell you when you're going to eat, when you can do exercise. So he said, though, if you accept the fact that in life, it's like being in prison, you're not in control of the outcome. You've never been in control of the outcome. It might seem like sometimes you get what you want. And so we think, oh, well, I got what I wanted there, so I was in control. But it's just life, sometimes delivering you pleasure and sometimes pain. So he says, if you accept that you are in prison, what is the best thing that you can have? And he said it was having a peaceful imprisonment. You know, an imprisonment where you are not fighting with being told to eat at this time, sleep at this time. And so if we have suffering arising, possibly the best thing is to be at peace with that suffering, mean to realize it's inevitable, it's destiny, it's not my doing. Yes, it's here. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Even that attitude, if it happens, is destiny.
I was going to ask you how to develop trust in the process, because to let the life happen needs some trust, but maybe it's just destiny also.
Yeah, you find that trust happens. For some people, trust is impossible. I really understand it is impossible because of the way that the life experience has happened. It has developed a lack of trust. And that's the normal human condition, is that because life has delivered pleasure sometimes, pain at other times, we don't, and we feel like our completeness is dependent on life being pleasure, 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 pleasure. And that's not our experience of life. We effectively are like a dog that has been hit by a stick. And so the dog has become untrusting of the person with the stick. And so a lack of trust is forced upon us by how we experience life. And if that starts to change, which is destiny and part of the seeking, where some of the insights start happening and we start feeling peace regardless of the circumstance, meaning some unfortunate things still happen. Someone steals your car or hits your car and doesn't leave you a note or anything, and so you have financial pain. And yet you find the attitude is one of surrender to the fact that this is life, and then a recognition, it's life, there's financial pain, but I still am. I still, if the movement of thought doesn't go into blame and hatred of the other person and focuses on the fact that I still exist in my fullness, when I come back to this ground of being, then we start, life is now delivering new conditioning based on our experience. And that may start to allow a trust to happen. So it's not something that we can do, but it's something that can be delivered to us.
Is it recommended to have a teacher?
I think that the information that is delivered, whether it's with a specific teacher or through books, through YouTube videos, is invaluable, because what's happening is you get the benefit of many people's experience condensed down into the key insights. So a lot of the hard work has been done. It doesn't mean that because you get an insight, suddenly you have knowledge and that's it. It still needs to be investigated for yourself, but at least the important things to look at, your attention and your thinking are being primed. If you watch a video on some physics or mechanics or something like that, you have a lot of the basic information to then do your own thinking on. And it's, can you imagine trying to invent something with no information, as opposed to doing it if you have the basic information that someone's already spent thousands of years, not just one person, but many people. So teachings they're setting us in the right direction. We still need to do our own investigation and processing, but that, when I say we need to do it, it's a description of how things happen. If you find yourself with a one-on-one teacher, so if you're just reading books, there's a magic, or what seems like magic, where the process, if it keeps happening, which it often does, we get this sense that we get the right book at exactly the right time, or we watch the right video at the right time. And it feels like life is orchestrating our change for us. If you have a teacher that you can ask a specific question of, it sort of optimizes that in a way, because you can get a specific answer that is relevant for you at that point in time. So I don't know that it's necessary to have a physical teacher that's alive, but you can definitely see the benefit in it.
We have come to the end of this interview. I sincerely thank you for the time and your teachings. I will provide French subtitles for the video before uploading, so that the French audience can benefit from your sharings. And thank you once again for being here today.
Thank you, Ludwig. It's been fun speaking with you.
Thanks, and have a good day.
Yes, you too.
Bye.